Hi, and welcome to Resolve's Federal Advocacy Day webinar on advocating for military and veteran families on Advocacy Day. I am Julie Eshelman. I am one of the Military and Veteran Task Force co-leads. This is going to be my fourth Advocacy Day, and I have been a military spouse for over 8 years now. And I am also the 2022 Armed Forces Insurance Fort Leavenworth Military Spouse of the Year.
Hey y'all, I am Kat Vandemet, and I am the other co-lead for the Military and Veteran Task Force for Advocacy Day 2023. I am a military spouse of 16 years, and I am also the 2019 Scott Air Force Base Military Spouse of the Year.
So the things that we're going to go over in this training today, we're going to provide everybody with an overview of the who and the what of our military and veteran community. We're going to go over some of the infertility data that exists for the military and veteran communities, as well as the family building barriers that these communities face. We're going to provide our military advocates with some tips. And we're also going to provide some tips for non-military advocates that maybe are taking on the military and veteran talking points on Advocacy Day.
So first thing that we want to do is we want to kind of give you an overview of what the military and veteran community looks like. But before we do that, you might be thinking, why is this relevant? And the reason is because not every state that is going to be represented on Advocacy Day is going to have a military or veteran connected advocate. And so what we want to do is equip our military and veteran advocates, as well as the rest of our advocates on Advocacy Day, to be prepared to speak on and for as a voice for military families. So the first thing that we have here, it's important to know, is the language that we're using and why we're using it. It is very easy to just say active duty service member, active duty Air Force, active duty Army, active duty, active duty, active duty. But when we do that, we leave out a large portion of our military connected population. So military connected persons or families is a much better phrase that you can use when you're working and speaking with in your congressional meetings. And those persons include active duty, veteran, National Guard, or Reserve service members and spouses. It's also really important for you to know that the National Guard and the Reserve are two different things. They are not the same thing. That's a very common misconception. They are two separate components that make up our one of the three of our military service. So military families are those that are currently serving in one of the three components of our military. So active duty, National Guard, or Reserve. Veteran families are those with a service history, but that are no longer serving. And then TRICARE, you'll hear it thrown around. You'll hear that word a lot. What is it? It's our insurance provider. Just like you have the federal insurance plans that have different tiers and different plans you can choose from within them, TRICARE is the same way. Most commonly, you will hear references to TRICARE Prime, but there are different levels of TRICARE. There's Prime, Select, Reserve Select, and then for life. So they're there. You don't necessarily need to know all of those and what they do, but they're all a little bit different in their own way. And then the beneficiary is the person or the family that is qualified for a TRICARE plan. So the number one thing that we want you to do is make sure you do not just blanket statement with that phrase active duty. Please, please, please don't do that. That's where you're going to use that military connected phrase. So military connected family or military connected person. Use currently serving to be inclusive of all of the military components that are active. So when you are talking about active duty, National Guard, or Reserve, you can say currently serving. So we have currently serving, and then we have veteran. those that are not serving at the moment, and those that are. So that's kind of a good way to distinct and separate those two out. But please, 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 we ask that you do not just say active duty. This slide is moving on to talk more about the data. And where we collected some of this data is from Blue Star Families, which is an organization that provides different resources and programming to the military community. And in part of what they do, they create a lifestyle survey that they issue every year. And in 2021 was the first time that they asked family building questions on that survey. And this is what we found out. We found out that 67% of military families that were surveyed reported struggling to build their family. 73% of those families sought care from a civilian provider. Why is that important? It's important because, why are they going to civilians? Why aren't they using the military providers? Why aren't they going that route? There are 6 military treatment facilities that have reproductive clinics. So we have a big country, and we have Alaska and Hawaii, and they can only provide capacity for so many people. And they are not geographically accessible to a lot of the people that need reproductive care. So those people are choosing to seek care from civilian providers. And then finally, 77% of families that pursued family building options. So those options included adoption, surrogacy, medical treatment, foster to adopt. They all reported out of cost expenses to build their family. And that ranged anywhere from $500 to $40,000, depending on what they were doing. So with anything, just like there are barriers to our civilian counterparts that are experiencing infertility, and trying to seek treatment, our military families have some that are more common that you may recognize right off the bat, and others that are not. But the number one barrier, lack of healthcare coverage for treatment. So one of the parts that you have to understand about TRICARE is that if you are seeking non-artificial treatment, you are 100% covered. So if you are someone who is going through hormone treatments, where you're doing, weekly, daily injections, and doing that with timed intercourse, your stuff is 100% covered. All of your office visits, your blood work, ultrasounds, medication is 100% covered. But as soon as you schedule an IUI or an IVF procedure, 0% is covered. The only way that any of that can be covered is if you can prove a service-connected injury that has essentially left one or both infertile. And so we're going to get a little bit more into the details of that here in a minute, but just know that it's either 100% or nothing. So that's a barrier for so many reasons. The next one, unexpected separations and deployments. We oftentimes will have, you could be in the middle of a treatment cycle and you're coming up on transfer day or retrieval day or whatever it might be, or you're doing that timed intercourse, and now your spouse or your partner is sent on a 3-week trip, or they get a short notice deployment and they're gone in 2 days and they're not back for 4 months or 5 months or 12 months. It happens and it interrupts the process. Next, we have frequent moves. They happen. And when you're doing that, and you have to pause cycles and pause treatment, and then you have to move and find a new provider. It's a whole thing. And it happens a lot. I can tell you personally, I've had 3 moves in the last 5 years. So if you can imagine trying to start and stop and referral processes and things like that, all kind of complicate it. Which leads to our next bullet, which is delays in family building timelines because of service. So all of those things that I already mentioned compound, and they lengthen the timeline. So something, sometimes it ends up taking a family 2 years or 4 years or 6 years or 8 years or whatever it might be And with that, we know that we have these windows of time where spouses are are the most fertile, and now they're delaying those, trying to build families at an older age, which is now creating high risk or geriatric type pregnancies. And so again, those timelines are just getting pushed to the wayside due to the service.
And to kind of build off of the things that Kat has discussed that are barriers for our families, another one of them is access to quality care due to your location of duty station. Our military families live all around the world. And access to quality care, whether they are stationed remotely here in the US or they are stationed somewhere overseas, or maybe they are not able to access care in their host country, provides or it leads to a huge access to care hurdle that they're overcoming, or that they're unable to overcome depending on that location. And if you're stationed somewhere that's really remote here in the US, you may be at a much smaller clinic, maybe one that doesn't have the same success rates as some of the larger, well-known clinics do. Another barrier is poor continuity of care, and treatments when relocating and deployments occur. When we're moving, 4 times in 5 years, or for me, we've moved twice in a 12-month span. That really makes it hard to set up and start at a fertility clinic, because by the time the referral process comes through, we're moving. But you also are redoing all of the tests. You have to start over at each new clinic. Maybe something or a treatment plan that one doctor had, your new doctor at this new location doesn't necessarily agree. They think that you should go a different route. It's really hard, especially if you had a doctor that you really trust and really liked, and you had to move across the country and can no longer work with them, or you've worked with the clinic and were successful with the clinic, and you're starting over at a new clinic, and you're apprehensive about that. As Kat talked about the lack of healthcare coverages and the things that TRICARE cover and don't cover, our LGBTQ plus military and veteran families face additional barriers and hurdles, even when they have a service-connected injury. The way that that coverage is written is if they're using their own genetic materials. Well, if they are in a same-sex relationship, that makes it kind of hard when you're missing half of the biological genetic material that is needed. And so, things like surrogacy also aren't covered. And so that leads additional barriers. And so getting these coverages and getting language written that is inclusive is very important for our military and veteran communities. Another barrier is access to embryos, and then the transportation expenses. So when we're moving across country, military families and veterans, that have gotten out and maybe had embryos somewhere else and they're living in a new place, are states away or a whole continent away, and that's expensive. Do they choose to transfer their embryos to a new clinic where they live currently, or do they travel back to that city and state to do their treatments? Both are expensive options. And so these are things that our military and veteran families are having to sit and discuss and determine the best route and the most affordable route, which none of those routes are cheap. So for those of you that are military connected or veteran connected, we want to encourage you when you are talking to your congressional leaders to avoid using military jargon when you're talking about your service, your family service, your connection to the military, and avoid using acronyms. If you're talking about all the different TDYs and your PCSs and how all that, who you're talking to, they may not know what all those terms mean. And so instead, I had to travel a lot for my career, or my spouse had to travel a lot within their role within the military. And so they weren't home a lot. We moved very frequently. We moved 4 times in 5 years, things like that. The people that we're talking to on Advocacy Day will understand those terms. If we're using the jargon and the acronyms in the military world that we speak so fluently, they're not going to understand that. So I would also encourage you to practice telling your story and practice telling it without our military lingo. And take time to educate others about your military life experiences by weaving that into your story, explaining to them how the continuity of care has been hard, or how the access to care and the lack of coverage, how that has impacted your family. Without that insurance coverage, we at times faced, struggle X, Y, and Z because of the expense. Whatever it is, take that time to share how your military life experience has impacted your family building journey. And your stories are going to be so powerful. And if you're comfortable sharing your stories on any level of detail, those personal and emotional details will leave an impact with those congressional leaders that you speak with, whether it's the leaders or the staffers. They're going to remember if they heard a story about a military family that was in the middle of a cross-country move, that after having a successful fertility treatment then was miscarrying in the middle of a move across the country. They're going to remember that story. That's going to leave an impact. And so if you're comfortable sharing those kinds of details, share them, because they need to hear that. They need to see how that lack of coverage affects us, and how our service affects our family building journeys. So what if you're not a military connected advocate? What if you are the person that was brave enough to step up and take the military or veteran talking points for your state delegation? Maybe you're a little hesitant. I really want to encourage you to find a way to connect your story and your life experiences to some of the barriers or things that you know about military and veteran lives. If your spouse travels for work, you can talk about how, it's really hard when they're gone for a weekend or one week out of a month. And I can't imagine how a military spouse would do that when their spouse is gone for 12 months. And you can tie that and find those little things to relate your story back to your talking points, and still get to share your story, but still advocate for our military and veteran communities. I want to encourage you guys to embrace advocating for our military and veteran families, even if you don't have that connection. Our military and veterans are the 1% that have stepped up to serve our country, and all the things that their families and themselves that they sacrifice. That's something that hopefully all of our advocates can kind of get behind and help to be the voice for the military and veteran communities. And so if you guys have questions, you want more information, you want more help getting prepared for Advocacy Day, the Military and Veteran Task Force is here to help you. And so you can reach out to your state captain to get connected to the task force. Or if you are a state captain, you can reach out to our task force, and we are more than happy to come and help prep your delegation or prep you as an individual for Advocacy Day.
And just a couple reminders, registration is a 2-step process. So if you haven't done that and confirmed that you are signing up, make sure you do that. If you can't attend Advocacy Day any longer, please let us know, especially if you're a military connected advocate, because we do not right now have advocates in every state. So if we need to move someone around, we need to make some time to do that. And if you have any additional questions for us, you can contact us either at advocacy@resolve.org, or you can email us at resolve
Resolve
military
military.
at gmail.com. Sorry about that, guys. Resolve military at gmail.com. And that will get you directly to Julie or I to answer those questions. But either one is fine. And I think that is all we have for you all. We appreciate everyone's time and your commitment to pushing and advocating for fertility treatments for all and all family building options, really. So we can't wait to see you on April 25th.
Yes, thank you. And, we really hope you guys have a great advocacy day. And we look forward to hearing about all of your successes.